Let's begin our presentation, Open for Business, the Future is Now. We'll be talking about the urgent need for a new workforce strategy playbook based on agility, transformation, and renewal, with creative solutions that scale fast as they prepare their businesses for post-pandemic future. We're going to highlight some case examples and discuss how to solve short-term labor dynamics, create a sustainable talent ecosystem, and gaining buy-in from the CFO. Hosting today's session is Christoph Niebel, Chief Sales Officer for LHH. Christoph, over to you.
Thank you, Helene, and thanks for joining us all today. As Helene said, my name is Christoph Niebel. I'm an EVP here at LHH, and many of you will know us and some of you don't. To make it really simple, our business supports over 10,000 clients globally across a broad set of industries, and we typically work with HR and people leaders who are challenged by changing the makeup and skill sets of their people at the speed at which their business strategy or external market forces demand it. And of course, COVID-19 is one of those examples that puts us all in a position to really drive acceleration of changing makeups and skill sets. Now, one of those clients that I've had the opportunity to work with for many, many years and who has become a good friend is Alan Wild, who I'm joined by today. Alan is not only a recognized expert in global employee relations, he's also had a long stint at IBM where he headed up ER and engagement. And he coined the phrase you see here on the slides. I'm going to read this for you. At a time when offering someone a career for life is really no longer an option, employers need to demonstrate that they care about their employees' lifetime careers. Now, I heard Alan say this a couple of years ago, but this couldn't be more relevant during these times today. Alan today is working with the Washington-based HR Policy Association as the Global Affairs Director. That is a membership organization of more than 350 CHROs in the world's leading companies, and is also an executive consultant with Leah Harrison. Most importantly, though, he made a huge career shift, as a story he told me over beer, and I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you as well, is that he started his career playing for Judas Priest. Great story, Alan, and I don't know how you made that shift into ER after that. He joins us today from Oxford in the UK, where he moved last year after many years in the US, to talk about how leaders need to prepare for their business for post-pandemic future. So let's get right into it. Alan, of course, this pandemic has completely upended the labor market. And, you know, I'm stating the bleeding obvious here. We have millions of people all around the world, you know, out of a job. All of us had to just show tremendous agility over the last couple of months, just steady the ship. And many of the people here on the phone today will just be thinking about what's next. Now, what's interesting to see is that there's already a couple of businesses in some of the hardest hit industries, aerospace, air and travel, oil and gas, automotive and insurance, who have moved from the back foot to the front foot and are becoming, you know, aggressive in looking to capitalize on the opportunity as it relates to the talent planning. They're looking at creative ways to care for their employees, for the lifetime careers of their employees, as you said. So I'd like to hear from you, what are the short-term trends and opportunities you are seeing right now?
Right, okay. Well, Christoph, and hello, everybody. It's great to speak to you all. And Christoph, we've been talking for the last 3-4 years about developing a modern approach to restructuring that's fit for tomorrow, right? And with the title of the presentation, The Future is Now, there really is a role for that discussion as we move into COVID. And I don't know if any of you read my blog, but I was writing recently and podcasting saying, you know, there will be two types of companies at the end of COVID. There will be those who come out as being heroes, and there will be those who come out as not being heroes of this. And of course, our objective is to turn companies into those that can contribute to the future, because if there's one thing for sure, that the way as organizations we went into COVID will not be the way that we come out. We will come out in different ways with, you know, maybe different models of employment, certainly different people working from home, different production processes, and we will have to learn from that. And we were looking at this, and this slide really summarizes a conversation I was listening to in the UK and translate. It was a conversation with a senior pediatrician, and it was a pediatrician, and he was saying, you know what, I'm a pediatrician. Nobody's bringing their kids to hospital anymore. I have nothing to do, so I went and trained myself as a critical incident nurse to work in care and COVID. He said, and that was great, and I'm working as a nurse. He said, but that doesn't mean that I'm not a consultant pediatrician. I will go back to that, but where I'm needed right now is in this role in critical care. And I was kind of thinking about that. And then we started to do some work and said, well, look, as we come out of COVID, at the moment, the governments around the world are trying to keep essential work going, but also trying to keep people at home and trying to have kind of social peace by paying people to be at home. So
Yes.
If you're in the UK, you get 80% of salary. If you're in the US, you got the enhanced unemployment. It applies right the way around the world. Now, we all know at some point, the government cannot afford to keep continuing paying people for doing nothing and keeping them at home. And the economy has to kickstart. Now, when the kickstart happens, what will happen is that some companies will go into the kickstart, and we know where it is today with huge short-term labor demands.
Yes.
If you look at Amazon, they have 150,000 vacancies today. Target, 100,000 vacancies, right? I bet there'll be others, and Christoph's spoken about them, that will not need their critical workers until towards the end of the year. And if you're in the airline business, or if you're in leisure, or if you're in some parts of the retail business, you will not need your critical people until much, much later in the year. So what we have when the money stops is we have some people looking at short-term labor demand and other companies that want to secure their workers for the future because they need them, but not until October and November, and say, well, what can I do? The long-term startup people are going to lose their best people, and the short-term people don't want to enter into the kind of employment commitments and liabilities when they know that the world will change and come back to normality. So we have two short-term issues. And wouldn't the world be fantastic if those people, where we don't need consultant pediatricians, went to become intensive care nurses? Or wouldn't it be great if people that are handling baggage in airports went to handle cardboard boxes in warehouses, right? It's a very, very straightforward skill shift. But of course, and we've seen some companies taking advantage of it, and we're doing something in Germany about between Amazon and Lufthansa. But what's needed is to be able to do that at scale. And the work that we've been doing says, look, if there's a gearbox that isn't bilateral between companies, but is multilateral between multiples of companies, that puts the people that need money with the people that need work, without them foregoing their long-term career or job, or their service entitlements they've got, why could we not do that? And that kind of accelerated the thinking about our modern approaches to restructuring, Christoph.
Yeah, no, that is a really good example of something that we've been talking for a long time, but becomes really important now. And you made a really important point. The government funding will run out. We will come to a point where companies have to make very difficult and hard decisions. And you just mentioned the example of Lufthansa catering, actually, in Germany, and Amazon, where we become this gearbox that you just described, because alone they couldn't do this, where Lufthansa has surplus of about 6,000 people, and as you said, Amazon is hiring tens of thousands of folks. The idea is that Lufthansa is lending underutilized staff to Amazon to save payroll costs for 6 to 9 months, which makes a huge difference when that funding runs out. But the gearbox is really the issue, matching employee profile with demands and needs through technology and humans, supporting employees in their decision process with coaching. Specifically in Germany, this is a voluntary engagement, and then ensuring that their experience is easy enough. delivering this process with data protection requirements and works council expectations, and then making this legally compliant solutions by leveraging what we have through our Deco parent, the 10 agency infrastructure, while at the same time helping these folks and upskill and actually making them more valuable when they return to Lufthansa. They have a win because they didn't have to lose very good people. Amazon has a win. They have the great talent in a short term and don't have to lay them off later. And quite frankly, the employee has a win. And these are that's an example of a gearbox we have built. When people think about that though, what would you ask folks on the phone here and on the webinar to think about as they're thinking about matching the short term and supply and demand? What should they do next for this specific topic?
Yeah, I think that's right. And the big thing is, you can see how the bilaterals work between companies. And of course, we can smooth out the German labor code situation. But the key is how do you take that multilateral approach that takes the short-term labor market and gets people with short-term availability into jobs with short-term need, without the employment commitments on one hand, and whilst maintaining continuity of employment and engagement on the other. We have the tools to be able to do this. If we can just escalate it into the short-term need. I mean, we do this long-term all the time, but we have a unique short-term labor market.
Exactly. And so what we are looking for, quite frankly, is more companies who want to lean in on this one. And we've had so many great conversations already. You have probably all seen the news out there. There's many companies are standing up these exchanges themselves, but it's very difficult to process 900,000 resumes to select 50,000 people. And I think that's where the value proposition of our company certainly comes in. Look, Alan, we talked a little bit about the short-term trends and opportunities. Let's also have a look at the sustained approaches that some companies are taking to actually challenge the traditional restructuring playbook. By now, we've all heard it, COVID is accelerating many trends that have taken shape before the pandemic already. One clear trend, we've talked about this a lot, Alan, that we've seen bubble up over the last few years, is that more companies are shifting their mindset from seeing talent as replaceable to thinking about them as renewable. Now, you have experienced this shift firsthand when you were at IBM. We met in 2016 when you guys were going through a massive transformation. And, frankly, one thing, we challenged you on that, what IBM had was a broken restructuring playbook. Yes, you were really good at moving people out, but there were certainly some negative effects of that. What we were able to do is co-create an approach that not only drove a higher return on investment, because it saved you guys millions of dollars in severance, but also a higher return on individuals. You strengthened your employer brand, raised engagement, and truly started to look after employees for their lifetime career. I would love you to tell us a little bit more about how IBM made the shift from replaceable to renewable. And Fawn, if you could just move forward on the slides so that Al can speak to that.
Sure. So we just need on the next one. But I think as we come out of, you're all focused on the Japanese flag with the 300 million. I will get there, okay? Don't worry about it. The interesting thing coming out of COVID is we've been talking for a long time about the changing nature of restructuring. And restructuring, mostly in the noughties for many companies, was about offshoring. It was about closing down jobs in one country and recreating them in a different form in another country, whether it's manufacturing to China, whether it's manufacturing and services from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, whether it's kind of IT into India. It was about losing people in one place and gaining them in another. What we're seeing increasingly is that we're seeing the changes where people are hiring and firing in the same places because the change is not geographic, the change is in skills. So the skills changes between the people we have at the moment and the people we need are huge, but the numbers are not so much different. Now, let's be realistic. As we come out of COVID, companies will rebalance their workforce and we will be in that traditional, we just have too many people, guys. equation. And of course, we have a role to play, and we're very good, and we're helping that. But if we go to this longer term view, which is about organization renewal, is what do you do when the mismatch is from a skills point of view? Now in IBM, what we did is, let me come to the end of it and I'll tell you the story. We started to invest in a very, very different way in looking at skills. We'd found it very, very difficult to predict what skills we need in the future, how many we would need at what points in time and where we would want them. And we would manpower plan the hell out of things. And guess what? We were always wrong. But the one thing that we knew is we knew what the supply side was. We knew what our employees were. So we started to look at our current employees and looked at their potential for transferability. We looked at their adaptability and said, if I look at my current workforce, who, for example, are fit for future today, on track because they're adaptable, off track because same course and speed is not going to do it for them, you know, their job is disappearing, or they're simply a poor performer. And take a look at those and then begin to move into an open conversation with people to say, look, where you sit with your career right now is not going to make it into the future. So you have some choices about what it is that you need to do with your skills and with your career. And then we went into this period of trusted coaching. So once an employee knew where they were, that they had to make some changes in their the way they currently went about things in order to move forward. They could either take coaching, they could look for another role, but they had someone who was working for them. Now, the conversation that we're typically in, and Christoph and I were talking about this, and I'll say to you, so the typical conversation we get involved in is kind of, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go. You're going to be fired. You're going to be made redundant. But there is a chance of being redeployed. At the end of that meeting, which word do you hear? And the word is
fired.
Fired. Absolutely, I'm fired. Think of it differently. If we said, look, you're a valuable employee, you're working overtime at the moment, but same course and speed, you can see where this business is going and you are going to have to change, which means you making decisions, and we care about moving you from not fit to fit rather than not fit to fired, right? And this is a huge issue. And of course, that's where you sit with independent coaches working with employees. You then move to a point of view of employee choice. And then, of course, what happens is, typically now you say, well, okay, you guys are going to be in the restructuring bundle and you guys are for the future. What you do is you say, look, I want to get a solution that makes an employee fit. And I'm agnostic whether that's inside the organization, inside our ecosystem, outside the organization, or independent. Well, you know, depending on their skills, of course, you're not completely agnostic, but what you want to do is to give people choices. And what you have to do is take two ecosystems, the dismissal ecosystem now and the internal development ecosystem, and blend them both together so you can get the right solutions. Now, you ask the question, so where does 300 million come into it? Well, what we did in IBM, and we didn't do this in England or the United States or Singapore, where frankly, you know, workforce restructuring is relatively easier unless you're facing the auto workers union, right? So it's relatively straightforward. We did this in Spain, Italy, Germany, and France. And Christoph and I remember Christoph saying to me, yeah, you give me the four most difficult countries in the world, and you say, if it'll work there, it's fine. Yeah, thanks for that. And I did say, well, I did let you off Japan. We could have made it work and had the five most difficult countries in the world, right? But so what we did was, we started to go through the supply side analytics, address the off-track population, had conversations with them, put coaches in front of them to talk for them about their careers, and gave employees choices. Now, what we thought was that lots of people would look at those choices and would leave the organization. Now, some did. But what actually happened was 3,000 people shifted in IBM from surplus or not fitting into fitting. And about 800 of them left the organization. About 800 of them went into jobs currently done by subcontractors. About 800 of them went into coaching and applied for jobs inside the organization and took those jobs. And the rest of them simply quit and left with no separation packages, right? So what we had was 3,000 people left the organization with our prior view on restructuring in those companies. We had just saved $300 million in redundancy payments.
Wow,
right?
that's a big number.
Yeah, it's an incredible number. And it was basically achieved by shifting the employee's mindset. So at a time of risk, an employee says, I have to hold on to what I've got and keep my seniority, and I don't put my head up and I don't put myself into new positions. So I hold on to what I've got because at the end of the day, I'll get a redundancy package. Into I have some options. I can think about them for myself and offer more creative solutions that enable people to move internally and externally. And that, I mean, don't trust me. This was Martin Schroeder, the CFO's number of 300 million.
And to this point, Alan, look, there's a lot in this story. I know there's lots of questions already in the chat, and we will share a detailed case study. But a couple of things that come to mind from you here now is transparency also brings with it courage. When we have people here on the phone who think about, how can we even move in a direction like that? What do you think are some of the main elements that folks need to think about, in terms of courage conversations at the senior level that drive to these outcomes? You already mentioned the CFO. How do you get buy-in from them? How do you think differently so you can start this conversation at your executive table?
Sure. Okay. I think let's start with finance again, because normally HR people will say, but my training budgets will not sustain this, right? That's exactly the first answer. Now, I won't go into the numbers with IBM, but I was sitting there dealing with labor relations and restructuring, and my budget for firing people was 6 times the retraining budget for the whole organization.
And that's not uncommon.
In what planet does that make any sense? And why was that? And the answer was because the CFO trusted me to be able to fire people and get them out of the door, but they didn't trust the training people to be able to reskill, to put people into other jobs, because it wasn't such a solid bet. And they actually saw them as 2 different budget lines. And sometimes they will be cut. Now, you guys listening will not believe this, right? Because surely you don't do it, is cut the training budget in order to fund your restructuring budget. I mean, it's just madness, right? The second one is line managers. Line managers have got people that are completely occupied for the moment, and they're working overtime and they're very committed. But the last thing they want is for them to move into another job or to go off doing training. They would much rather keep people until their skill set is exhausted and then get rid of them and get some new people in. So line managers kind of don't like it either. And within HR, I hate to say it, we've developed such a strong muscle on how to restructure people that we've forgotten how to reskill in many places. And we have
re-energize.
Re-energize and reinvent ourselves, yeah.
Yeah, I think the key learning that I've had from this, which I've had started to talk with lots of my clients about, is the shift of mindset of the investment and the associated return, and getting rid of this barrier in the middle between restructure funding and development funding, and seeing this as one pool and maximizing the overall return. And that is once that light bulb goes on for people, it can unlock a lot of value. So that's a really important one. As we move into our Q&A now, I see there's already a number of questions, and please, on the Q&A function here on the chat, please put more in there. But one of the questions I've seen here, Alan, is how were the managers and leaders at IBM upskilled to have these critical coaching conversations?
Oh, so we spent a huge, well, let me go back. So this started off as a restructuring initiative. And I was running it because I had all the restructuring money. It was me that was sitting there in a budget of $1 billion, right? Now, once you start to re-look at that, you can then begin to invest in different spaces. And we invested a lot of time and energy on giving employees feedback. So we trained managers to say, if you are going to have this fit for future, on track, off track performance discussion, you have to equip your managers to be able to do that. Because, you know, an outside consultant can't say that. It's got to be your managers that are doing it. And as part of this year, if you look at the holistic package, we actually perversely, we did away with the rating-based performance management system in order to open up a conversation that didn't impact on your pay or your bonus or your career, to talk about strengths and weaknesses and how you needed to improve. So huge investment in line managers. And then I have to say, you know, my boss might be listening and she will smile when I said this. As we move into this, my boss in HR wasn't my, you know, biggest supporter as we went through this. I had two sets of big supporters. One was the CFO, who could see the financial difference. And the second was the country managers of all the operations in the world who hated restructuring, who just wanted another tool to get the right people into the right jobs. And once you have your country line managers engaged, then that investment in your first line supervisors, then of course you need the independent coaching that comes alongside that. Because your managers can be as good as they like at giving feedback, but they're not perceived by employees as, this guy is in my corner fighting for me, and they understand the internal labor market and the external labor market. They know what pay is like, they know what prospects are like. I have a real expert batting for me. And of course, that's huge in LHH investment. Well, that's the beginning of the LHH investment.
Yeah. And exactly. So by providing people those insight into labor dynamics, I remember we spent a lot of time with your managers around that, and or just even providing, you know, baseline coaching skills and having, you know, transparent and authentic conversations. There's many different ways how you can scale this through an organization, whether you do that by, you know, doing training the individuals or giving them coaching support directly. Today can be done in many interesting formats, you know, where you democratize coaching and scale this. One of the other questions that just came up, Alan, which is a really interesting one, back to the short-term piece. You know, I'm going to read it out. You know, there's stories about companies doing this on their own, business to business. What are the drawbacks of having two companies trying to manage a swap of workers on their own without the gearbox? CVS, for example.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the country legal system. I mean, one is you can work one-to-one with other organizations and map loans, and it works well. But, you know, you're not getting the choices of people, and you're not getting the ability to do it at scale. But the second thing is, you've got to work a system which within the country's legal system, and this is where the German experience is so good, means that one company can continue employment with the person and either pay them nothing or a small amount of money, but their employment continues. And at the same time, the person can work for a second organization, right, with a short-term employment contract that then allows them. Now we can one work at the gearbox that makes the fit between the two and do the analysis of the skills so that the receiving organization doesn't have to kiss 1,000 frogs to find 100 princes, right? I mean, we can do that and take all that out, but we can also deal with the legal situation of how can you broker a loan with a company. So you can see what the employee wants to do. The employee will say, well, look, I'm working in a warehouse for Amazon, but this is not my future career. You know, I work for Lufthansa. You know, I work for this company and I want to maintain my continuity of employment. And if they do fire me in 2 years' time, I want my whole 25 years of service to count. There is no way I'm leaving Lufthansa, right? So we can also do the coaching that opens that up, because the way people are fired at the moment pours concrete into mobility, and it's for us, we can unlock the mobility. That's the key.
I think that's a really important one. Brings me actually to one question that was also posted here. Now, how was that, shift in strategy, replaceable to renewable, communicated across the company? Now, how was that positioned top down?
Well, what's really interesting is if you look at my old boss, Ginni Rometty, and she's still involved in IBM. She retired as chairman at the beginning of the year. Every single conversation she's having with stakeholders outside, she now talks about responsible tech and organization renewal. So we started in 4 countries and built it out. We came up with different solutions for the less regulated labor markets, which worked. And on a different call, I can talk to you about what we did in India, what we did in Singapore, what we did in the UK, what we did in Australia, using the same overall approach. But we built up, and it wasn't until we had 300. Ginny said to me at the beginning, look, this is a great idea, but don't think I'm going to talk about it to employees until you've proven to me that this can work, because I still need to be able to skill the workforce through. Yeah. So that was kind of her take on it. So it grew, but I had country managers saying, well, in the Benelux, I had the Belgian country manager saying, hey, what are you doing in France? I've been talking to Jean-Claude, and he said, hey, come, talk to me. And it actually, the success of it in the small countries actually spread. And I had people on the phone to me saying, come, we need to do this. We can work this.
Yeah. Okay. And then another good question, which fits along those lines. If you have the senior level umbrella and then the sponsorship and the conversation, there's still a choice on the employee level. Here's one question from Vincent Scherer. What role does the employee play in reinventing, reskilling herself or himself? We have been experienced resistance from some employees.
Yeah, I mean, the employee is at the center. Unless you unfreeze the employee from where they are at the moment, they're not going to look creatively at what they're going to do, whether that's internally or externally. And a part of that is having the open feedback conversations. But the other part of it is, one of the killers of this is the time-honored system of restructuring, what I will say, I'll call kind of unaffectionately lump and dump, right? So I give you a lump of money and I dump you into the hands of an outplacement consultant who may or may not find you a job, right? Lump and dump. Mm-hmm. What we can do is find different alternative exit strategies that enable people to move into a different job, or to take reskilling or training, or to take a job in a lower paid organization without losing financially. So
say more about that, Alan.
Well, I'll take the extreme example in Spain. So in Spain, they thought I was crazy, right? So in Spain,
you definitely are. Let me just state this for everyone.
Yes. So in Spain, I suggested that we should go to employees, because we were paying kind of 20% above market rate for jobs that people could get jobs, but they weren't going to take the pay cut and they weren't going to lose the seniority. So I said, right, instead of paying people 3 years pay to leave us, why don't we give them 50% of their salary for 4 years, and tell them if they don't like where they are in 4 years, they can come back. Now, how crazy is that? I mean, financially, it's not crazy at all. First, our experience is, one, after leaving for 4 years, they are not coming back, right? I mean, which is the biggest worry. But secondly, instead of giving 3 years pay in one huge lump sum that dings our cash flow, why don't I pay them 50% of salary, so that my business is making a 50% saving from day one? People love it, and I'm only paying them 2/3 of what I was paying them before to leave the organization. So you look at it and say, why are you paying people 50% of their pay for 4 years for doing nothing? And I say to the line manager, well, you're prepared to give them 3 years pay for doing nothing tomorrow.
Exactly.
And it's just counterintuitive, but it's the kind of way that we've got to look at the exit scenarios that are appealing to the employees and that work for the employees, right?
Yeah.
As much as they work for the company.
Look, the COVID has given us one certainty, that it's time to challenge the status quo. There's not a boardroom which sits idle and silent right now. And, you know, when I said you're crazy, it is because of those ideas, because you're always leaning in and challenging the status quo, and you're making a ruckus. And that can, you know, create energy and create new solutions. Many of the folks here on the phone will be thinking, this sounds great, but how am I going to do this in my organization? You know, I will have to pull stakeholders together. You know, maybe I should wait because, you know, let this whole thing die down and we look at this in 6 months. I've been in countless conversations where people said, that sounds great, but we can't do this here. What's your advice for those folks? Because they will say, we're not an IBM. What's your advice for people, you know, so they can challenge the status quo in their own organization?
Let me tell you the biggest lesson I drew out of this, and you know, let me criticize myself in this. So I was the person responsible for restructuring, and I just got fed up of being very effective, but having large budgets and firing people. And when I say firing people, I'm talking about, well, I won't tell you the exact number of people that left, but from 2013 to 2017, IBM hired 270,000 people and their headcount went down. Do your own math, right? So we were pretty busy with that. Now, so I had a big restructuring fund. So when I was faced with the HR department saying, well, you know, this will not work, and the learning people saying, oh, but I don't have the money or whatever, I just went on and did it. And what I found after a year was I'd actually created a parallel HR function, right? So I got my people who were involved in performance management, who were involved in putting people on courses and doing it. And I created a mini parallel HR function. And I had to go back and unpick that and mainstream it into the learning function. And actually, here's the thing at the end of it, and it's my biggest pride. At the end of the day, restructuring was moved from my labor relations function to the learning function.
Yeah.
So the learning function is now responsible for restructuring. And of course, for me, that was 8 years in IBM, and thank you very much. And I can go off and do some consulting and work with guys like you and come up with crazy ideas. But I mean, that was the end of it. So my learning is one is, and maybe companies need some help with this. And people always ask to say, look, let me talk about my problem. How do I create an ROI? Let's go to the top of the call, right? For my company. And we can help you create an ROI for this. You know, how do I put this onto my board agenda and make sense and don't look like I'm trying to be nice to everybody? Because you can be nice and save tons of money. Right? This is, you don't have to spend a lot of money in order to do the right thing. So, I mean, that's the one side of it. The second is take the HR function along with you, with the learning folk, you know, and don't get into those battles of the learning guys saying, well, you're not having my learning budget. And I say, well, you're not having my restructuring budget. And, you know, you'll lose a year in that conversation. You know, I'm not helping you until I get the money. We've all been there, right?
Yes.
So pull that all together. So I think the first is persuasion of the organization of the ROI, and it becomes a broader decision than simply HR. And then the one HR ecosystem that's going to deliver it, because your recruiters who've been focused on recruiting externally for the last God knows how many years, suddenly have to turn to recruiting internally. And guess what? That ain't so sexy as running advertisements and doing things externally, right? So, you know, so your recruitment people have to come in. Your performance management people have to come in. Your learning people have to come in. Your compensation and benefits people have to come in that says, you can't give people this amount of money over 5 years' time. How do we deal with benefits, right? So those small things you have to get to pull together in a holistic program. And you know, for me, we have some particular skills in certain areas of this, but in terms of holding that overall ring and turning disparate systems into a single ecosystem, I mean, Christoph, you and I have been there and done that, and that's
Exactly
what we need to do.
And that's where I think for everyone here in the call, this is going to be the question is, how do you take an idea, something that you resonate with, into action within your organization? The first thing I'd say, this is the time to do it, because there's never a good time, but this is the time when your board, your executive team will be open to hearing new ideas if they can showcase both a return on investment, a bottom line saving, as Alan talked about. And we would be happy to work with anyone who wants to create a business proposition to their CFO, because we see in general 30% savings in restructuring severance costs by rethinking this, which can be reinvested in your learning, in your reskilling, in your development, bridging people, which all drives a much higher return on individual, better experience, higher engagement, higher throughput in the organization. And it is crazy that we today still have restructuring playbooks that are based and built for capacity constraints in a world where we need to really stop for a big skill shift. So we are all in with anyone who's interested in exploring this further in your organization. We're kind of on the top of the hour here, Alan. I want to commit to people. Thank you for your questions. We've had a ton here. We have a case study that will come out to you about IBM, Alan, and LHH story and how we challenge the status quo. We're happy to lean in with you on this. And Fawn, if you take us to the next slide, I'll just give you just a quick goodbye here. Do you visit lhh.com/ROI. We are challenging the status quo and what return on investment has moved to, and we believe it's moving to the return on individual. There is a fantastic opportunity for companies right now to shift from replaceable to renewable, change the mindsets and behaviors at your executive team table. And you can do this many ways, scale this throughout the organization, and we are there here to help you to drive that strategy to execution gap. So Alan, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much on the call.
Christoph, just one small point on leaving. And it's the issue of say, well, why LHH? And ask me the question, coming out of IBM, one of the best jobs in the world, and why go to LHH? Is because when we get into this stuff, this thinking is built into the DNA of LHH, right? This is not new. And I joined an organization which was very clear, had 2 feet in the boat. This wasn't a trial. This was not a fad. This was 2 feet in the boat, and let's go.
Thank you, Alan. And I love working with you. I love that we're making a ruckus together. We're both a little bit crazy, and anyone who wants to join us on that journey, you're more than welcome. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Cheers all. Take care.
Bye.